Welcome back to Track Talk. Tonight we're going to be doing a game of 1830. We've done 1830 a number of times in the past, of course, but this game's a little bit different in the sense that it is a tournament game. So these players are maybe a little bit more incentivized than the average player on the channel to perform well, and I hope to see a high level of play as a result. Also, because it's a tournament game, I have not gone ahead and blocked anybody's names. I've left them as they are. I think that if you're playing in a tournament, you can reasonably expect to have other players looking at your games and caring about the outcomes. So I don't feel the need to give anybody anonymity. We will, with that all said, just jump right into the auction, and it looks like Triple J will be leading us off. He goes for the D&H. D&H is a solid private and is pretty flexible. It doesn't lock up too much of your liquidity early in the auction, leaves you with other options. Romaine, he goes for the CNA. CNA is a great private, of course, but if you lock up a lot of your liquidity, you may end up falling victim to price enforcement from other players. So a little bit of a higher risk early bid, in my opinion. Arusin takes the opposite approach of Romaine and will be going for the Champlain and St. Lawrence. Champlain and St. Lawrence is not the greatest private. It has the control of the CPR public company, of course, but in terms of revenue and just position in the auction, I don't think it's very valuable. In this particular situation, it is a dangerous bid. Ken Butcher is now in a difficult situation, and via proxy, the entire table is a little bit tenuous here because if Ken Butcher does not go on the D&H, Triple J can very easily pull, get the D&H for face, and then potentially we'll just see the ripcord pulled again with two very low value M&Hs and CNAs. So I think that Ken is almost forced to go on the D&H here. Alternatively, he could, I suppose, go on the M&H, the Mohawk, and hope that Triple J pulls and then they all get face value privates. That would be at least a little bit more even for the table. So we'll see what he decides. He does contest the D&H, and now Triple J has the option of going on the M&H and just hoping that Romaine will take the face value Camden and Amboy, and then he will get the face value Mohawk and Hudson. Face value Camden and Amboy is notoriously strong in 1830, but if you can walk away with a face value M&H, maybe the net difference is something that you're willing to compete against. Instead, he will contest the CNA, brings us back to Romaine, and Romaine can go on the M&H here and just say, well, if you're going to price enforce on the Camden and Amboy, I'll let you do that, but I'll just get a very good private for face regardless. So that's what he does. And Everson, he could pull and get the Champlain for face as well as Schuylkill, but that's really not all that exciting. He may want to contest one of these other privates, specifically the M&H. And if he were to do that, I don't know that Ken Butcher would necessarily be incentivized to pull here with a contested D&H, so we may extend the auction by doing that. Instead, Arison does pull, which will give a M&H for free to Romaine. It also puts Romaine in a little bit of a different or difficult situation in terms of price enforcing on the CNA, so you could expect that to go cheap as well. I think that's just not a very strong position for Arison. He has $15 of private income. He's not necessarily safe from falling on the B&O either, depending on how priority works out. I haven't worked that out just yet, but it is possible he could still fall on that. And then he's given away very cheap privates to two of his competitors. So I don't really like that start to the auction. Triple J and Ken will be duking it out for the D&H. Ken, this is the only private he has the ability to bid on. So if he doesn't win this, he's certainly ending up with the B&O. If he does win this, just looking at priority, it looks like he will actually have first right of refusal on the B&O. So Arison, by my way of thinking, would actually end up with the B&O, which is going to be devastating. He ends up with two kind of crummy privates and then the worst private of them all, the B&O. And that was entirely based on his decision to pull there. So I question that decision. Triple J, he is bidding up to 95 on the D&H, leapfrogging Ken Butcher by a little bit. We'll see how dear Ken Butcher is willing to go for this. 100, and it looks like he takes it for 100. Romaine gets the M&H basically for face. Very good deal for him, of course. And now he's in the maybe less than enviable position of having to price enforce for the Camden and Amboy. I think that leaving the auction with the M&H and the Camden and Amboy is pretty bad, especially if you don't get the Camden Amboy for very, very cheap. It's just too much liquidity locked up too early. You're very inflexible. Yes, you have great private revenue, but you're going to be, very much in the back seat and dependent on the actions of the other players throughout the early game. So I don't think that Romain wants to push this too hard, but we'll see. He goes up to 175, and I will buzz through this fairly quickly. Looks like they are getting up to reasonable prices, so this is a little bit risky for Romain. Triple J, on the other hand, he would be happy to take this for 225 or somewhere in the 240 range. He's in no real rush to back out of this auction, so it's really up to Romain in terms of where he wants to back out. Triple J going up to 225, and he does win it, so pretty nice for him. And Ken Butcher, assume he'll be passing here, and Arison, in theory, will end up with the B&O. Triple J passes, and Romain takes it. So didn't have to do that, and I think this is the wrong decision. He already has a good private, and now he's lost all liquidity. He's not going to be able to float in the first stock round. He will miss out on the opportunity for a quick buy-in of the M&H, which is always good to get. He could, in theory, float the B&O very low, but that really makes the B&O private's value even worse. So surprised that we saw this. I think that he could have easily passed there and forced down Arison, and then Arison probably is functionally eliminated from the game in the auction. Regardless, he pars it. He pars it at 100, so he's not even going to par it low in order to try and get a quick float. He's just going to sit on his private revenue, which at $50 is pretty impressive, and hope to get back in the game that way. And with that, we are into stock round one. Arison surprisingly ends up with priority after being given a little bit of a gift from Romania. So Arison, with his choice of companies, could take the PRR and try and deny that for Triple J. And other than that, can really pick whatever he wants. May see him take the CNO. Seems to be a private, popular company to pick early. So he does take the CNO. No surprises there. Ken Butcher, now he's a little bit under the gun. Can decide whether or not he wants to try and deny the float to Triple J. If he does float the PRR, however, Triple J can float in stock round two with a single stock sale. So not the end of the world. I will note that Triple J is just $2 off being able to float even without the stock sale after his private payout in operating round one. So a little bit unfortunate for him. May have been intentional in terms of Romain's price enforcement in terms of denying him that opportunity. Ken Butcher, he does take the PRR. Triple J probably not all that upset about that. Wasn't going to be getting it either way, most likely. And he will actually float the NYNH, which is a little bit bold. He has enough to buy 5 shares, so it is safe. It's not like he's given someone else a free presidency here. And we'll see if anybody has mercy on him. I believe Arison should have enough cash to buy 1 share if he wanted to, and Romain, of course, is going to have to put his cash somewhere, so maybe he'll have some mercy on Triple J to even things out after taking mercy on Arison. Looks like he is buying the CNO. CNO is reasonable to expect is having the most revenue, so not going to be buying the NYNH, and the other players are continuing to float their companies. Triple J, he is going to continue buying the NYNH. So do expect to see that PRR sale in the next stock round, and just a quick float of the NYNH in stock round 2. Romain continuing to spread his cash around, buying CNO shares. Is open to a dump now. Needs to be a little bit careful about that, but probably won't see that happen. Triple J continuing to buy. Romain also buying, and everyone else is just buying their own companies. Looks like Triple J has gone back. No, sorry, he had that share from the auction. I thought he had bought a PRR. Not to be. Ken Butcher, he buys the last CNO that will be floating up. Was already operating first, so not changing operating order. And with just 2 companies floating, don't imagine we'll be seeing the 3 train come out in operating round 1. So priority may not be the most important, at least for this operating round. Harrison, he is just fully investing his cash, going back for PRR. Ken Butcher passes, and it looks like he will be leaving with priority. So he does sit on a shares worth of revenue or capital, but he leaves with priority as a result. And he is cross invested, so if he's worried about these shares being sold down, he'll at least have the opportunity to sell first. CNO, first operate, heads west towards Chicago, no surprises there, and probably will just be buying a single 2 train if I had to guess. And we do see the 1-2 train come out. PRR, he is heading east towards Lancaster, and probably also a single 2 train, which is what occurs. We're into stock round 2. Ken Butcher, should we be expecting any sales here other than Triple J selling the PRR? I don't believe so. Romaine still doesn't have cash to float and is probably going to be looking to buy another share, actually, so don't expect him to sell. Ken Butcher could just sit on his cash here and hope to pick up a cheap share, but since he is operating right ahead of Triple J, it seems unlikely that he'll be able to pick up the sold PRR share. So he does buy a PRR. Triple J does sell. So Ken Butcher, probably reasonable not to expect to get that cheap market share, but yeah, I guess it doesn't matter. He could have just waited to buy the PRR, but maybe wants to make sure he doesn't lose priority. Reasonable to do that. Okay. Triple J buys his NYH, which is now floated, will be operating first as a result of everybody else falling back. Romaine, 1 share for him possible, but passing. Harrison does buy a share. Romaine probably kicking himself a little bit, was hoping to end up with priority, but instead is going second last and still has cash. So Harrison ends up with the PRR. He actually buys the IPO share and not the market. And actually, it makes sense for him to do that because now he's safe from the dump. So it does cost him $4, but that's chump change, and he feels more secure with his share now. Ken Butcher, he's passing. Triple J passing. In theory, he could have sold a share here to avoid taking the stock hit when it falls back. I don't think that would be enough to change operating order. It would not. So maybe not incentivized to do that. Just happy to go second in priority. Romaine, he's passing. It is painful that he has to sit on $100 so early in the game. Harrison also passing. So Ken, despite all odds, ends up with priority. That's unexpected. CNO's up first and heads into Chicago, runs for 70, and looks like he did pay it out. NYNH's first operation, he lays the double gentle. Always interesting to see how NYNH players think about this decision and who they want to favor. This is obviously in the benefit of the B&M company compared to the NYC. Does Triple J think that he's going to be in position to run either of those companies? He is operating, I should say, acting early in priority, relatively speaking. So if priority doesn't change too much by the time privates are bought in, maybe he will have his choice of the B&M. Okay, we'll see. It does make the NYC very unattractive. He buys just a single 2 train, and there are 3 2 trains left. So no single player has the opportunity to buy into the 3s until another company floats. PRR, he secures Lancaster, tokens it right away, runs for just 30. Into stock round 3, Ken has priority, as we discussed. Unfortunately, purchases are a little bit limited. He can't buy the PRR. CNO sold out, and NYNH also, he takes a little bit of a hit, and the revenue there is going to be a little bit underwhelming. Is Romaine going to sell here? I think it's reasonable to expect that. He has a little bit over $200 in CNO shares, and with 185 in his treasury, he could float the B&O here. So Ken may want to just sit on cash and hope to buy some cheap CNO shares. They will have high revenue and they'll be cheaper once Romaine has sold out. Instead, he does go for the NYH. Triple J buys the PRR. Romaine sells the CNO as expected. That does change operating order. So now the PRR, unfortunately, is operating first, which means that they are potentially least likely to get their private buy-in compared to the NYC, the NYNH, and the CNO. And I expect Romaine will be just taking the rest of the stock round to float his B&O. Arison, 1 share for him, and he picks the PRR. Interesting that he's doubling down on the PRR. Could pick a better paying CNO share. The PRR is operating first, as we noted, so maybe potentially less likely to be sold down by the presidency in the next operating round. But Arison has to assume that he's going to be leaving with priority. So any shares he buys, he'll probably have first right of sale. And I say that because Romaine has telegraphed that he's going to be floating the B&O. Nobody else has any cash. So a little bit surprised that he picks the PRR here. Ken passing, triple passing, Romaine continuing to float. And we'll see if anybody wants to do anything about this priority or operating order. Ken in particular may want to sell a share here and try and operate after the CNO. Arison could potentially respond with a sale of his own, but you got to try something. Romaine continuing to float. And Triple J takes it upon himself to change operating order. So the PRR is now operating after the CNO. And is he doing this in an effort to change priority? Maybe. Currently, Arison would be leaving with it, but if Arison sells a share, then Triple J has insured himself a second in the next stock round in terms of priority. So that may be the reason we're seeing this now. He also trades up for a CNO share, so that's a strictly better share in terms of revenue. Romaine, last action on the B&O here. Arison, actually Romaine has sold a share, so Arison may be able to get away with selling a CNO and still keeping priority. That's nice for him. He does not avail himself of that, content to be operating first. And Ken Butcher sees that Romaine has telegraphed another action. He's going to sell a PRR down as well, gets into yellow, basically guarantees that he's going to be able to buy in his private because he's now operating last. So he gets a little gift there. And does he go back and buy a paying share? He could pick up that CNO. He's going to pass. Triple J passing. Romaine buys an NYNH. So Arison does leave with priority probably, but he unfortunately is not going to be operating late in the operating order. Looks like he's content, and everyone, actually Triple J is mixing things up a little bit still. He sells an NYNH, that's not going to change operating order. And does he go for a CNO? He does. So safe from the dump and a little bit better revenue. Also denying market shares to an opponent, so pretty nice. So if all people end up with priority, it looks like Romaine will actually end up with it, which is pretty interesting because he was the one I was saying was almost certainly going to be going last with the B&O float. But these players are not playing in a predictable fashion. And we pass into the next operating round. This is operating round 3. B&O, newly floated company, is in a rough spot. B&O is just commonly in this scenario. I think I've talked about it before on the channel. There's no guarantee that he gets into Lancaster. So do you risk it and try and head towards Lancaster? Do you head south? Do you head towards Atlantic City and hope to get into Philadelphia down the road? Just not a great situation to be in. And this is the reason why, or one of the many reasons why the B&O private is just lackluster. You lose too much tempo with the high par. I think that if I'm this player, I probably do lay the sharp turn into Lancaster and hope that I am able to get into there. There's no guarantee that green breaks before Ken operates. You may get lucky and have Ken break into green on his operation and then get that track lay. And then even if you get blocked at Lancaster, you can get a run into Atlantic City for 40. So you have some options and you're potentially getting a break at Lancaster. That said, heading directly towards Atlantic City and hoping to get the Philadelphia track, also reasonable. He heads down south towards Washington, falling further behind in tempo, and let's see how many twos he buys. He buys 2 twos, making it very easy for the other players to buy in their privates, and I think we will see Arison probably just buy a 2 and a 3 here and quickly start the next stock round with a lot of liquidity. The number 2 tile gets laid on Akron, no surprise there. And with a single 2 train, he'll be running for 70. Reasonable to withhold this, actually. He's going to get a influx of cash from his privates, and he has 2 leeches in terms of his co-investors. Does he really need the extra money going into the next stock round? He probably does. Um, he has pretty bad privates, so if he wants to buy shares, he's going to need the revenue of his payout. He does pay it out, moves forward, and buys the 2 and then the 3 in his privates. Interestingly, does not take advantage of the track lay for the Champlain and St. Lawrence, leaving the option open for a CPR suitcase, and we'll see if he's able to make that come to fruition. Needs to be careful with operating order that the private ability doesn't go away before he has the opportunity to use it. NYNH, he is upgrading New York. There is a cost to his company for that, but he has higher revenue, and he has not laid any track for the B&M. So maybe hoping that the eventual B&M presidency or president will lay that track for him. And currently, Triple J is going last in priority, so he has lost the ability to float that B&M almost certainly. Should be picking up a 3, which he does, and then does he buy in his private? He buys in the CNA. So the NYNH is broke, but the president of the NYNH, Triple J, already has enough cash to float. Only downside is the way he played the last stock round is he's late in priority, so the best companies are going to be taken by the time it gets to him potentially. PRR does get the Philadelphia track. He lays it, I guess what I would say the correct orientation. It's tempting early in the game to screw over the B&O and deny them a run into Philadelphia, but if you do that as the PRR, you're going to have to lay the second city up against New York, which is going to prevent you from ever running it. So it sometimes pays to be cooperative. You get a run into Philadelphia yourself and a potential run into New York later in the game. He runs into Philadelphia for 60, and he pays that out. Expect he'll also be buying in his privates, which he does. And he actually buys 2 3 trains. So I don't know if that's an effort to make this company a little bit less attractive when it's sold down. But 2 3 trains is potentially powerful. So, if that's his goal, may not be succeeding there. We are into the stock round 4, and Romaine has priority. Unfortunately for him, his company is the only company that didn't run, so he only has the $100 he left the last stock round with. He quickly buys a B&O share of all things. That is difficult for me to explain. B&O has just 2 2 trains and doesn't really have that great of a route. It's also a very expensive share, and you're clearing your own market. I think there were better decisions to make there. You got 2 companies with 2 3 trains in shares available. Also reasonable, just sit on cash and then wait to pick up a cheaper share. You have to expect that at least one of these players is going to be selling out to float a new company. Arison, he sells the PRR, puts it into orange, and he's also selling heavily out of the CNO. Selling out of a company with 2 3 trains, a little bit risky. 2 3 trains and already developed map presence is not necessarily a death knell in terms of a presidency. Could see someone try and take that over. Regardless, he has $600, which is more than enough to float for max. He interestingly picks the NYC. So we spent some time talking about this track lay on New Haven and how that was pretty bad for the NYC. And he is not concerned. I will also point out that the M&H has not been bought in and is still a blocker. So the NYC track options are very limited. Can head nowhere by heading northeast, and alternatively can head southeast, but it's pretty easy to be blocked there. Really no guarantee that he gets a run at all. So this is bold, and I'm not entirely sure why he's picking this company instead of the B&M. B&M is lackluster. I don't like running it either, but when the track gets laid for it, sometimes you're stuck running it. Ken Butcher, he is selling out of the NYNH, and we'll have to sell a few more shares here to take advantage of a new presidency. If he sells the CNO share, he will fill the market, which will make Triple J have some trouble raising capital, which he does. Interesting that Arison left him that opportunity. One more sale from Arison would have filled the market and locked up that capital, preventing Ken Butcher from floating potentially. Ken does take the B&M. He's in a kind of unenviable situation of parring at 67 though, so he has no capital left in the PRR and is going to be train locked when the fives come out. And he also has very little capital being brought into the game through the B&M. So he's in a dangerous position, a position that could be a setup for bankruptcy. Triple J, um, he is now buying the CNO, so realizes that he's going to have pretty poor options to pick from and is just going to buy paying shares. He could take this presidency. Like I said, 2-3 trains is nothing to sneeze at, and the CNO has decent track started already. Romaine out of cash, as noted, and maybe kicking himself that he didn't save any money to buy these cheap PRR shares or one of these other companies that's been sold down. PRR, if you buy these shares, you probably should expect them not to be paying for a while, but you are future proofing in terms of buying early brown shares. Arison, he is floating the NYC. Ken Butcher, floating the B&M. Triple J, is he going to take the CNO here? He is instead buying brown shares. Okay. Romaine passing, and it looks like the other players are on auto float. Triple J, he's buying the PRR again. Still safe from a dump here, but unsafe to hold anything more than this. Romaine passing, and the other players still buying. Triple J is the only one with decisions, it seems like. And he goes for his NYNH, buys it from the IPO. Looks like the two new companies have floated. We'll see if either of those players wants to sell down a share in their new company to get a paying share or potentially change operating order. But it looks like actually they do not have too many options. Operating order is pretty fixed. Triple J, he bought and then sold his NYNH, so he is now also yellow and may see him withholding heavily on that company. But if he does that, he needs money to come from somewhere, so he's going to need a different presidency. Looks like the two new presidents are splitting. Ken Butcher does sell a share. Arison's waiting. And where does Ken put this cash? He buys his PRR from the market. Could buy one more if he wants. Triple J, he buys the NYC, okay, expensive share, and he sells it down once. That does not change operating order, at least in the next operating round. We'll have to watch that. Yeah, so his NYNH is going to be operating after the NYC, both operating rounds, regardless of that sale. Romaine is continuing to pass. Arison passing. Ken goes back for the PRR up to 70%. And if you're Triple J, you may want to buy a third share here just to float it up, make it a little bit harder for him to withhold into brown. Triple J does buy it, okay. And everyone's passing except for Triple J, so he's going to be going last in priority again, most likely. Goes back for the CNO, does take the presidency. So he's going to start running away in terms of share density here. He's got a yellow company, he's got cash left in the stock round, and now 2 presidencies. Arison still passing, Romaine still passing, Ken. Looks like everybody's passing except for Triple J, who actually does something surprising here and pars the Erie. Certainly does not have enough cash to float the Erie, but just reserving this presidency. Looking at the map presence or opportunities for the Erie, now that he has the CNO, could see some cooperation here at Pittsburgh, leaving that open for both companies to run through. But the Erie is going to be a little bit of a late start here and could struggle to find a map presence. Expect we'll be seeing everybody pass now, and looks like we do, so Romaine retains priority. NYC, first operation, has to lay his home. Really only one orientation that makes any sense. He is, I'm sure, hoping to get into New York, but really no guarantees that that is allowed to happen. So we'll see. He picks up a 4, resting the 2s before they can run. And I think that's bad news for the B&O, who neglected to secure a 3 in the last operating round and is falling back. He's the sole investor in this company. He, as we commented, bought his own market share and is just falling back on that. So very bad news for him. That's a big setback. B&O upgrades Baltimore, so still kind of disinterested in getting into the northern tract here from Altoona to Lancaster, just optimizing revenue. But this is a company that isn't paying anything, so really no benefit to him for that. Buys the 4, does have 5 train money, and is going to maintain that for now. C&O, he is heading on down to Pittsburgh. Should be pretty easy for him to secure that token. Remains to be seen whether or not he gets the Lancaster token. And the person that determines that is the PRR player. So the PRR gets to decide whether or not he upgrades Lancaster and whether or not he tokens in Pittsburgh. Both players, the B&O and the C&O, have token money. And the C&O is going to be operating after the B&O. So this is the PRR player's call. Does he allow the B&O to upgrade and token in Lancaster or not? C&O running for 110, and he actually pays it out, which is surprising because he's just a hair above Arison in terms of shares in this company, and he desperately needs cash for permanent trains. So I guess he's anticipating there being a little bit of a stall before the permanent trains come out. I mean, looking at his position, it's very tenuous. Three trains, a bunch of liquidity locked up in the Erie. If there was a train rush here, which is feasible, with the B&M being newly floated, B&O have a pretty full treasury, NYC having a pretty full treasury, he could very easily miss out on the 5s and go bankrupt on the 6s. He has stolen the special ability that Arison left the auction with by taking this presidency, and he does lay it with the intention of a CPR suitcase. So he's going to not wait for the 5s to lose that ability. B&M first operation, and he links up with Providence, so NYNH is happy about that. Gets a little bit of a break in terms of terrain cost, and the B&M is forced to buy a 4. NYNH with a 3 train can hit into Providence, but may want to block the NYC instead of upgrading Providence. And it looks like he does. So there is a valid upgrade here, but it does not run into New York. It's a straight. So the NYC player has to content himself with a run into Reading and Allentown potentially, but he's not going to have a run for the next operating round. So really bad news for Arison. He's going to have absolutely no revenue to speak of into the next stock round. This also denies Arison even the little sharp run into New Haven. So just pretty brutal for him. But that's pretty predictable. I think that if you're in the stock round and you're looking at companies, you have to assume that you're not going to have a run on the NYC. NYNH runs. Does he withhold here? He pays that out as well. So a little bit surprising that he's paying out on both of his companies. Kind of would have expected him to withhold on at least one of them, particularly the company that was in yellow. But he's unafraid, just taking advantage of his share lead right now. And he buys a train over from the C&O. So the C&O now has very little revenue, and instead of having 2 3 trains, just has 1. This is definitely a dump opportunity. The operating or the stock priority is not going to be in the favor at the dump, but he may be hoping that Arison does his dirty work for him, sells the C&O deep into orange, and then Triple J can step up all those cheap shares. PRR 2 3 trains and has the decision of upgrading Lancaster or laying Pittsburgh basically, and will go for the Lancaster upgrade. This, of course, allows him to get into Reading and Allentown, but he is operating behind the NYNH, so can't guarantee he gets that track, and this, more importantly, denies the token at Lancaster to the C&O. Runs 2 trains for 110, and with 70% of the presidency, he may see a payout here, but he withholds. Into the next operating round, and NYC probably kicking himself, just upgrades his home, setting up for a run into Boston potentially, but that is expensive. No guarantees that he's able to afford permanent trains if he has to continuously lay $120 track. Not going to push trains, and we are onto the B&O. B&O is buying in his private, so unblocking the NYC, but unfortunate for him, he was one operating round too late. The NYC is not even going to be all head over to Rochester. And then he does link up with Lancaster as expected, and we see a token. So that's bad news for the C&O, but the C&O is also the Erie presidency, so still has some potential to coordinate on those 00 tiles. Running for 140, which he pays out. C&O is now up, upgrades Pittsburgh, and does not drop a token there just yet. Running for just 80, and does he withhold? He does. So he was taking the stock bumps in the last operating round, but realizing he needs to get cash from somewhere, so is going to withhold at least once here. NYNH should be laying Reading and Allentown, and does, because the number 2 track was taken by the C&O, which is very common, not able to complete the loop into New York South, but is giving himself an out from New York. So potentially has late game run potential for the NYNH. Runs for 90 and pays it out. He is shuffling trains again and leaving the C&O with just $1. So I think I neglected to note that the C&O had shuffled all of his cash into the NYNH. So he is, I think, taking the strategy we highlighted last time, where he's going to incentivize Arison to sell out of the C&O, put it deep into yellow and orange, and then buy those cheap shares. Just consolidating all of his assets in the NYNH. The downside of this is that he loses a run on one of his trains, but I guess he's done the math and decided that the cheap shares are worth it. B&M, he upgrades his home, runs his 4 train, and he pays that out. PRR withheld last time, probably is going to see another withhold here. He upgrades Pittsburgh for the revenue and runs for 170, pretty good, and withholds it. So he's now in brown and inching his way towards permanent trains, has kind of rehabilitated his position in terms of train liability, but he has very little cash going into the stock round and will be falling behind on shares compared to Triple J as a result. Stock round 5, Romaine is up, and he has a ton of cash just because he was able to buy in his Mohawk and Hudson private. He was the player that missed out on that in the past, and he is going to be floating the CPR. So he sees that it's set up for a suitcase and wants to lock in that capital to push trains. The downside of the CPR suitcase is that you've got 6 shares, $600 worth of liquidity locked up in a company for 1, maybe 2 ORs, where they're not going to be giving you any revenue. So unless you can bankrupt someone with this, it sometimes is not worthwhile. He sells the NYNH, and we are into Arison. Like Ken Butcher, this player was not able to get much revenue in the last operating set. Different scenario, of course. At least Ken Butcher was withholding. Arison, on the other hand, is just kind of dead in the water. And I think he's forced to sell out of the C&O here or risk a dump back. So he sells down, and he's going to be investing in the B&M. Ken Butcher, he can snap a quick... actually, he can't even buy those C&O shares. He has so little cash. So he may just be passing for the stock round. Triple J, he is buying the NYC from the market. Surprised to see that. May see that trashed again. I don't know that this company is going to have runs in the next set. Romaine, he has bought a B&M. Arison, buying the NYNH, depleting the market a little bit. Triple J goes for the C&O share that was sold down. I'm surprised that he has this NYC share. I would imagine he'd rather have the C&O. Romaine buying the C&O, and Triple J just passing. So he may be leaving second to last in priority, and Arison, it's looking like we'll end up with priority. Just confirm that. It looks like he does. Okay, so we do see a little bit of a stall here. No new companies floated. Doesn't look like anybody's in a position to push trains. And if there is a stall, the high risk, high reward strategy of dumpster diving and buying cheap 3 trains is going to, benefit from that. So I think these other players need to change the status quo. If you've got 16 shares to everybody else's, 10 or less, you're going to slowly pull ahead in this game. B&O, upgrading down south. Does have a 4 train that will be hitting that, so makes sense. Running for 150, and he pays that out. NYC, still very limited track. Could pay $120 and may need to just to get any type of revenue at all, which he does. So he'll be running for 80, which compared to some of these other runs is not too shabby, but boy, was that slow in coming and quite expensive to set up. He pays that out, and looks like he's not going to be pushing trains either. NYNH, he is heading towards Scranton, so has set himself up potentially for a run into New York South via Scranton. Needs to be a little bit careful that with his 1 token, he doesn't get tokened out somewhere. And also, he's living on the razor's edge in terms of revenue for permanent trains. So a $120 tile lay is not something to just laugh off. Running both of his trains and has $160 revenue. He's in a great position here with 90% of this revenue under his control. So he pays that out. B&M, upgrading Providence for a few extra dollars, and running for 120, which he pays. C&O, single 3 train. He is heading up towards Erie potentially. His other company will be starting there, of course. May want to lay some early track for it. He's withholding again. PRR, 2-3 trains. Looking to head west to Chicago for the end game. Running for 190, pretty nice revenue, but maybe just withholding still. He does. B&O, next operating round. He is coordinating with the PRR in order to get west to Chicago. The PRR of note did token in Pittsburgh, so if the B&O doesn't token there, could very easily lose out on a run to the C&O. C&O does have token money, so B&O needs to look out for this, or else it's potentially going to be losing out on the rest of the game. Looks like he passes the token, which I think is objectively a mistake. Where else is he going to leave that token? Could leave it in Philadelphia. That will almost certainly upgrade into New York, but I don't know. I think you got to lay it somewhere. As it stands, I think your late game potential is going to be neutered. Runs for 150, pays it out. NYC, he is able to get into Providence. So with a 4 train, will finally be hitting New York. Has kind of rescued his position in terms of revenue, but boy, that was slow. He's going to be a long time coming back into this game. He tokens in Providence and runs for 130, which he pays. So this pressures the NYNH and the B&M a little bit. I don't think either one of them would be super excited to get tokened out at Providence, but it's not always the most exciting token to lay. I think if you're the B&M, you care about this more than the NYNH, which is a shame because the NYNH is operating ahead of you. The NYNH has a guaranteed token in New York, so no way he's getting tokened out there, and he has an escape valve to the west. Whereas B&M, if he's tokened out at Providence, that's rough. Loses access to New York. He does have an escape valve through Albany, but unless he's able to leave Rochester open for the rest of the game, where does Albany get him? So I think he cares a lot more about Providence than New York does. New York and New Haven. Running 2-3 trains still, and he does lay the cost into Scranton and immediately drops the token there. So he's playing the long game. He doesn't care about Boston. He says that he's going to get a double tap run into New York, and I guess potentially he's now opened up a token spot for his C&O, his other presidency, which would be a pretty big comeback for him in terms of rehabilitating, the map position of the C&O after losing out on Lancaster. He runs for 180 and pays it out. B&M, he is heading towards Rochester through Albany. It doesn't seem like a very consequential track. Odds of him controlling Rochester seem very, very low. running his 4 train, and looks like he pays for 120. CNO, he is making a beeline towards Scranton. Needs to be careful he doesn't lose out on that token to either the BNO or the PRR, um, both of whom still have tokens available and token money. So needs to make sure that operating order works out here such that the CNO can get the token in Scranton. And actually he tokens in Pittsburgh, which means that he does not have the cash for a token in Scranton right now, but if he withholds, he still will, and he's just eliminated the B&O from token contention in Scranton. So much better odds that he ends up with a second token there. And if he is able to secure that, he'll have a pretty nice late game run from Chicago into New York, at least potentially into Boston, depending on where that B&M token ends up. Runs for 80 and does withhold, staying orange and also securing token money. PRR, 2-3 trains. He links up with Scranton, which is an interesting decision. There's a little bit of a game of chicken with this track. If he doesn't lay that, he potentially can sneak a token in Scranton, but now that he's laid that, he's basically given it away to Triple J. Triple J will have no trouble just upgrading Scranton and immediately toking. In terms of operating order, the CNO is very likely to be operating ahead of the PRR, even with a pad on the PRR. It will be pretty easy for Triple J to manipulate the PRR's operating order. So this seems questionable. Runs for 190 and withholds again. So with a withhold, basically guaranteed that CNO ends up with the Scranton token. Surprised we see that. Stock round 6, Aerosoon's up, has a little bit more cash, was able to secure runs on the NYC at least finally. And he has no options in terms of floating new companies, so he needs to find paying shares somewhere. He is going for the Erie. Looks like he's going to force the issue and force the float. I like that. I think that you're falling behind in this game. You got to make sure that trains get pushed and pressure the leader, which is, I would say, Triple J, by threatening to rust his trains. So definitely makes sense to try and push for a new float. I say Triple J's ahead. Romaine technically is ahead in terms of net worth, but his map position and his companies are underwhelming. The CPR is usually trash tier, and the B&O has been tokened out. So I think even though Romaine is technically ahead in value, he's behind in the game. Ken Butcher buying his B&M, just looking for paying shares. Triple J going for a B&O share. Does have decent revenue, but he's needs to be aware that he's potentially under fire at the Erie presidency. Romaine, he is floating the CPR, so two players motivated to float new companies here, Aerosoon and Romaine, and we may see ourselves finally get into an explosive train rush here. Aerosoon, he is continuing to pressure the Erie. Ken passing, so maybe just waiting to see what shakes out here before investing his cash. Triple J, he buys the Erie, willing to defend. Romaine buying the CPR, no surprises. Aerosoon has floated the Erie, continuing to stay neck and neck with Triple J. Ken still passing. Triple J has to sell. He sells the NYC, probably anticipating that Aerosoon is going to have to sell shares to continue to pressure the Erie, so might as well sell one of his shares first and hurt the amount of money he gets from that. And he does buy the Erie, one share away from securing the presidency. Romaine, he is selling the B&O and going back for the CPR. One thing I'll say is that if you're Ken Butcher, you're probably loving this. Triple J is being forced to sell paying shares for non-paying shares in the Erie. So if you're trying to get back into this game or eke out a win, this is good news. You're seeing all the other players hurt each other and you're just sitting pretty. Romaine passing. Aerosoon, he does sell the NYC, so Triple J anticipated that and got out before the stock hit. And Aerosoon buys the Erie. Ken passing still. Triple J, he has to sell a B&O. So he got lucky with the NYC, or not lucky, but he was able to get out early. But he unfortunately had to eat the stock price dump from Romaine selling a share before he was able to. He secures the presidency here. We'll see if Arison wants to sell a share and then buy an Erie to tank it full 5 shares, or if he's just going to be content to sell his 4 shares. Definitely don't want to sit on these 4 shares, I'm sure. Romaine, he has floated the CPR. Both new companies have floated. Arison, he does sell and now has to find new places for his investment. Um, Unfortunately, options are a little bit limited. He had to sell his NYC, so no shares there, and doesn't want the CPR. He's going to be looking at the B&O and NYNH, B&M, or CNO. Looks like he's going to be doing a little trashing before he finds his eventual home for his cash, buying a CPR for now. And now that the other players have kind of revealed their hands and committed their capital, Ken is feeling safe and going for an NYC share off the market. Triple J, he is passing. Romaine, he sells a CPR, bad news for Arison, and he goes back and it's just going to be sitting on cash for now. Arison, he buys a B&M. So I was expecting him to trash the CPR, but it looks like he's just going to be sitting on a non-paying share right now. We should pay attention to operating order here a little bit. There's a poison 4, but the 5 trains are soon to come out. Currently, the CPR is in position to buy the 4 and the 5. Assuming that this is suitcased, he also has the option of just buying a train across and then buying the trains with the B&O. Could potentially end up with a 5 train that way. A little bit hard to predict exactly how that's going to work. But in terms of operating order, it actually doesn't matter because those are the first 2 companies to operate. NYC, he has permanent train money and is a good position in operating order in terms of ending up with a permanent train. NYNH is probably not going to end up with a 5 train unless he ends up with the very first one, which seems unlikely. And the B&M is in position potentially for a 5 train, but unfortunately, I don't think his revenue is going to be high enough for a single withhold to get him there, so he probably is out of contention. Erie, he has cash for a 5, operating late, so pretty good chances he ends up with a 5. And then the CNO and the PRR are pretty cash poor. Actually, the PRR has managed to end up with a bunch of cash, so potential for a 5 there, depending on how the train rush breaks. We'll see if anybody wants to do anything about that calculus and change operating order. Looks like so far people are content with things. The NYC has no more market shares. Arison, he buys a B&M. That's floating up, and he'll be operating ahead of the NYNH as a result. But again, I don't think he's in contention for 5, so not the most important change. He buys and then sells it for just $3. Okay. And Arison is still taking actions, buys the NYNH market share. Triple J takes an opportunity to buy the CNO. And Arison also going for the CNO with $38. So that $3 flip really didn't change anything for him. It's not going to get him an extra share. Unclear to me why he took that little detour. Doing things like that are potentially significant, right? You give someone a market share that they didn't have, you cost yourself priority. I don't know that $3 is worth, detouring in the stock round for that. And we actually will just pass right into the next operating round. Ken Butcher ends up with priority, and Arison is going last. So that little flip on the B&M is totally inconsequential. Strange. Regardless, we're into operating round 6 on the operation of the CPR, and we'll see if the CPR wants to suitcase or not. He is laying track. That said, I don't know that this necessarily commits himself to running the company. I will often see him or players lay this type of track and then still suitcase the CPR, just leaving their options open. He buys the 4, which means he'll almost certainly be buying a 5 here, and we're right into the 5s, first company to operate, off to a bang. B&O does have the option to withhold here. Will that be enough for the 5? I think we'll just have to see. Alternatively, could drop a token in Philadelphia. but certainly will not have enough cash for the 5 if he were to token there. So we'll see what his revenue is. He's running for 160, sorry, 190, which is actually exactly enough, picture perfect for the 5 train. So he's going to miss out on a token on Philadelphia, which could be potentially be significant, but he will secure himself a 5 train if he withholds here, which he does. On to the operation of the NYC. NYC is operating or upgrading Boston, running for 160, which he pays, and that's the last of the 5s. So no more 5s left in this game, and if you're Triple J, that's pretty scary. You got 3 trains and 3 companies. Only permanent trains left are 6s and Ds. This is a very tenuous game state for this player. We will see the NYNH operate, and they immediately upgrade New York. A little bit surprised to see that. This does potentially open up a token opportunity on Scranton for the B&M. In terms of tokens, the B&M has a lot of good options here. A token in Albany is not the end of the world, especially if you expect the Erie to join the game and start heading over towards the east. A token in Scranton, though, would be pretty incredible. So may see that upgrade in token. NYNH running for nothing to sneeze at, 250, and he pays that out, so he's not scared about these 6 trains. And then will we see the B&M token in Scranton? Instead, going to be upgrading, potentially setting himself up for an upgrade of the same tile here, and then getting 2 runs out of Boston. I'm a little bit surprised we don't see a token in Scranton from him. The Scranton tile seems to be, the center of the map right now, controlling both runs into New York. And it looks like there's no upgrade available for Scranton, so he unfortunately is going to miss out on that. We'll see. It's going to be very interesting to see who ends up with that. I imagine that the B&M would love to end up with that token. That said, he's going to just make do with the New York token. That's a pale intimidator, a pale impersonator compared to the Scranton token, though. That's pretty underwhelming. Just bad news for him that the upgrade was not available. Runs for 180 and pays it out. Erie now needs to determine where his home city is going to be, but instead is going to be just suitcasing. We've been talking about the CPR being a suitcase a lot in this game, but it is also possible to suitcase the Erie, particularly if you control the NYNH and the C&O and dictate what track gets laid here. So it's going to be incumbent upon the PRR to break the suitcase right now. He's in the best position to do it. He buys a train out of the NYNH, doesn't lose a run on it, and looks like he's just going to be shuffling all the money out of this company. Next company from Triple J is the C&O. C&O, unfortunately, the status quo remains, is unable to get this token in Scranton. So instead is going to get himself a run into Baltimore, it looks like. But actually not even running that track just yet. Runs for 110 and withholds it. PRR, a ton of cash here. Could see the 6 train come out, which would be pretty devastating for Triple J. He would be able to immediately buy a D, but he's not in a position to get the upgrade. And where do his 2 other permanent trains come from? I guess granted, as it stands right now, he only needs 1 permanent train, but even out of pocketing a 6 on the C&O is going to be pretty painful. The NYNH D run is okay. So can run from Boston into Scranton and then down into Lancaster potentially. But if you have to sell a ton of shares to afford a train on the C&O, that's not going to be enough to win the game. PRR, he is upgrading Lancaster. Lancaster is not that important at this point in the game, but it does have the effect of opening up a green tile for Scranton. In terms of token ability, he has thrown away his token on New York. So while he could have done this upgrade and then gotten the token in Scranton with the B&M, as it stands, he's not going to be able to. The C&O did withhold, So with a payout from the PRR, he could potentially secure that token on the PRR. The B&O is the other player that is in the running for this token, but he has no cash. So I suppose the C&O will end up with that token after all. Surprising to see. He runs for 170, pays it out, and he's going to buy a train from the B&M and does not leave himself cash for the token. Okay. NYC is up. He is upgrading Albany, so now plenty of track available for Scranton, and he's going to run for 320, which he pays. CPR needs to decide whether or not to give himself a run. He has permanent trains both in the B&O and the CPR, so may need to just bite the bullet and start running the CPR as a real company. He's going to run for just a measly 70. The B&O revenue is going to be much better, upgrading Baltimore, running for 410. But unfortunately for Romaine, he's got a bunch of shares still in the CPR, so that poor revenue needs to be balanced against the good revenue in the B&O in terms of his overall portfolio. NYNH has a ton of cash, and will we finally see a 6 train come out? He is upgrading Scranton. Ken would have been in a position to get that token, but unfortunately for him, he has not left himself any cash to do it. So C&O still in a position to take it. Runs for 140, pays it out, and is in no rush to rust his own trains. Understandably so. B&M, he is upgrading Scranton to Brown, running for 210, and he pays that out. Erie still being suitcased, it looks like. PRR needs to work on breaking this Erie suitcase, I think. He is heading in that direction and running for 320, which he pays. So amazingly, the 6 train has still not come out. And I wonder if Ken is realizing that if Triple J bankrupts here, that he doesn't win or will not win. So maybe that's why we're not seeing the 6 train being pushed. He is technically ahead in net worth, but if he were to fall back on the PRR and then Triple J bankrupt, it's possible that Romaine would have enough cash to just eke out a victory here. So Ken may be kind of being held hostage by Triple J right now. When Triple J goes bankrupt, he'll sell all these PRR shares, put them at the floor of the market, and that loss in net worth may be enough to put Romaine ahead. Hard to explain these decisions otherwise. C&O, he is upgrading the 00, but actually protecting the suitcase of the Erie. So no threat for Triple J there just yet. And he does secure finally the token in Scranton. I was surprised to see this go on token for so long, but it just comes down to the available tracks for the upgrade. So he has excellent map position on the NYNH and the C&O, but he has massive train liability. So he's taken a very high risk approach to this game, and we'll see if he's able to afford or survive a bankruptcy. Runs for 280 and withholds it. Ken, above the cert limit on the PRR, is forced to sell and has a ton of cash. He actually dumps the PRR, so I missed that eventuality here. And the danger here is that he now is quite far behind in shares. He has a ton of cash, so he may be able to make that up, but where is it safe for him to invest? So Triple J went from 3 companies with no permanent trains to now 4 companies with no permanent trains, and he still doesn't have a single 4 train. So if Ken was worried about bankrupting Triple J, it seems that worry was confined to the last operating round. He's certainly positioning himself to bankrupt Triple J in the next operating round. Does that really change whether or not he'll win compared to the last operating round? I think Romaine is still in a better position in terms of net worth. He's going to be paying out on both of these companies. He has 4 trains running. He may very well have more net worth than Ken when Triple J goes bankrupt. Ken sees the danger and is paying shares, hoping to stay ahead here. Triple J, he is also paying shares early in operating order, realizes he needs cash from somewhere. Romaine, and actually Triple is selling out of the Erie as well. Romaine's up and buying the B&O. That company is probably going to be sold out. Arison, I haven't been talking about him as much. He is kind of trailing in this game, I would say. Buys the B&O as well. And Ken is able to actually goes back for an NYC, so not willing to put 2 shares into the B&O. NYC also has good revenue, of course. Triple J gets that last B&O share, so that company will be floating up. Romaine going for the NYC, and Arison, he buys the last one. So NYC and B&O, similar train roster and very good revenue. Both will be floating up early in the stock round. Ken Butcher, tons of cash, going for the CPR. CPR is underwhelming in terms of revenue, but what else does he have to invest in? Triple J is the president of 4 companies, and none of them are really safe to invest in. So players are going to be forced to put their cash in the CPR. This is the downside of this strategy for Ken, is that he takes a pretty good company and with good map presence, potentially good revenues, and is forced to invest his cash in the CPR, which is just underwhelming. Triple J, he buys a B&M. Ken wasn't able to buy that share, obviously. Romaine, he's going to buy the CPR. Arison also, actually going back for the PRR. It is cheap, but the odds of it paying out seem very, very low. Ken Butcher buying the CNO. Again, a company that probably won't be paying out, but at least it's safe in terms of a dump opportunity for Ken, and he's floating it up, so it's going to make it harder for Triple J to maintain that brown status. And Ken is basically out of shares that he can safely buy. So that's again the downside of dumping your company. Triple J buying his own PRR, and since it's brown, he's able to max out. Romaine passing, Arison buying a CPR, so potentially opening himself up for a dump. Could see that happen. Romaine is right ahead of him in priority, and if Romaine wanted to run 2 5 trains out of the B&O, that would be a pretty easy decision to dump the CPR. Ken, he buys the CPR as well. Feels safe to invest 2 shares now that Arison is between him and Romaine with 2 shares. Triple J passing, Romaine passing, and Ken Butcher looks like he's going to be giving Triple J priority, but maybe not concerned, just assuming that we're going to see a bankruptcy. If we are expecting a bankruptcy, though, it's a little bit surprising that he's investing in Triple J shares. Triple J happy to take priority, just passing, and we are into the stock or operating round 7. Arison is first off, and he is upgrading to optimize his routes a little bit, but he's not making any progress on breaking this Erie suitcase. I think Arison is not in a position to win if Triple J bankrupts, so maybe he's not eager to break that suitcase. CPR, upgrading Ottawa for an extra $10, and actually is able to token it, so the increase in revenue is much more than 10 because he has 2 trains, so running for 110 now compared to 70 last time. If you're expecting a bankruptcy, those few extra dollars may make or break you. So reasonable. B&M, he is interested in bankrupting Triple J, so he's going to be buying a 6 here almost certainly. Surprised we didn't see that last operating round as commented. B&M or B&O not affected by the 6 train coming out, and he is actually spending money to lay a second run for himself into Philadelphia since he has 2 trains. These trains are not going to be long for this world, though. Either we're going to see a bankruptcy or that D is going to come out and rust this 4. So he's running for 450, just a little bit more than he was able to put together last operating round, and he pays that out. Now, just looking at the game state here, if Triple J were to bankrupt, looks like Romaine would be taking this game. Of course, that would change a little bit because Triple J is going to have to sell shares. Triple J is invested in the B&O. B&O would have a way to fall. Would that be enough of a difference to give Ken Butcher the game? Potentially. Uh, Ken Butcher would also be hurt with sales of the B&M, but the B&M is ledged. So actually, if Triple J were to go bankrupt, I think Ken would win, which is, I think, why he feels comfortable buying the 6 now. Triple J, no trains to speak of, and he does buy the D train. So all those 4 trains are gone, and he now is going to have to somehow find 2 more permanent trains, at least until that Erie gets a route laid for it. Speaking of, Erie lays into the 00, so I think just making it difficult for a quick upgrade in Rochester to give him track. PRR train list. This will be a common theme for all of Triple J's companies, it looks like. He buys the D from NY&H, just shuffling trains, so not eager to buy the 6 just yet. And almost has enough money for the 6 here in the C&O, but instead is going to shuffle money into the PRR. So it's interesting that he's left cash in the C&O. He doesn't have any tokens. He could potentially lay the $80 track here, but he would only need $80 for it. So why is he having $155 left in this company? When you see this, I think that there's some red flags that have to come up. Is he arranging for a self-bankruptcy, or what exactly is going on here? This is not a random number. So he has some kind of plan here. CPR, continuing to head towards the 00, running for just 80 now because his second train is rusted. NYC, similar situation, heading towards Rochester, running a single train, running for 190, which he pays. B&M, he is looking to bypass Rochester for later in the game, running for 260 and pays it out. B&O, looking to bypass as many dits as he can, is able to double tap into Philadelphia, runs for 280. That's probably the rest of his run for the rest of the game. NY&H is going to shuffle trains out of the C&O. And Erie, still no run. PRR, he is upgrading Columbus, potentially getting into Chicago and bypassing the DIT that he would otherwise have to run. And now we see Triple J's master plan. So he left just enough cash in the C&O that he would have to sell shares in order to emergency buy the 6. And he's actually able to arrange a dump in the operating round. So this is not something that you see often, and it's not something that is even possible in titles like 1889, for instance, where a presidency change is not allowed in a emergency buy. But in 1830 in particular, you can dump companies in the operating round if the circumstances are exactly right. And Triple J has engineered a way to make this happen. So if we just fast forward here, he now has 2 permanent trains, 3 companies, but one of those companies is a suitcase. So in theory, he's met all of his train liability, and he just offloaded the C&O onto Arison, who's now going to be forced to either shuffle trains or buy a D train. And the nicest part about this is that the C&O is in brown, and it's guaranteed to be in brown because even if it pays in the next operating round, it's still going to only be $20. And guess who has priority? Triple J. So he's basically recruited Arison to buy his D train for him. In the next stock round, he's going to buy all these shares and have a shiny D train that he didn't have to pay for at all. That is very clever and a very, very nice way back into the game for Triple J, who otherwise was bankrupt. So we have ourselves a game still. Arison, he is going to have to sell shares, which is devastating, but he's been in kind of a behind position for most of this game, and since he started the NYC, he sells shares and buys the D. Very nice play from Triple J there. NYC on Arison, he probably really wishes that the NYC had been able to run one more time before he had to finance that D train. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had to sell shares. He is now working to break this suitcase. There are 2 track that will be valid upgrades here, and I don't believe it's going to be possible for Triple J to prevent that from happening. So Triple J did have a really, really clever play in terms of avoiding a bankruptcy in the last operating round, but he's actually not out of the fire yet. He may need a third permanent train, and he certainly does not have the cash to buy one. So he's going to have to shuffle or declare bankruptcy if this suitcase is broken. CPR, heading up towards Barry, doesn't want to contest the double O's here, just realizes he doesn't have the track points to make sure that he ends up with the tile oriented the way he wants. That said, he may have wanted to consider laying this towards the double O and just maintaining the token money so that he could threaten that tile with a token if it were upgraded, and then head into Barry from Ottawa. Runs for 80, pays it out. B&O really kind of out of track at this point. He, however, has laid 1 track that would be required for this upgrade. So inadvertently, potentially giving Triple J a breath of life here, but it looks like the other track is still available, and I can't imagine that Ken Butcher is going to allow this to go unupgraded. So close call for the table here, but I think that we will still see the suitcase broken. B&O pays that out, and B&M does break the suitcase. So Triple J is still under the gun here, and B&M is paying for 260. NYNH, he is looking to bypass Pittsburgh. The NYNH's D run was looking pretty good, but the tokens from CNO and PRR have cut it. So just setting himself up for some better runs in the future. Runs for 450, which is pretty darn good. Pays it out, and now has some decisions to make with the Erie. Erie buys the train from the NYNH, and I don't imagine he wants a D train long term in the Erie. The Erie right now does have a decent run because there's no tokens, but what are the odds that that is allowed to stand? PRR running through Columbus and is able to run for 280, which he withholds. So this is going to be how he finances his permanent train. And Arison, I neglected this, but he actually bought the D train out of the CNO, so he's going to lose a run on this. And I assume he's going to be buying the 6 train or the 5 train out of the NYC. So he realized he was going to be losing control of this company. Does have to lose a train run, but at least he won't be losing the D train. He'll just be losing a 5. And we're into stock round 8. I have to assume Triple J is going to snap up these CNO shares. He does. So does get a free train, but isn't quite as lucky to get a free D train. Just gets the 5. And he is 10 shares ahead of his nearest competitors. He is quite behind in terms of net worth. But if he is able to finagle his way into another permanent train, he will have pretty good runs. Romaine, underwhelming revenue on the CPR, but does have pretty good share appreciation buoying that up. So if he can continue to run to the right, these numbers become misleading because the share appreciation becomes so great. His investment opportunities are potentially a little bit limited. Doesn't want to steal a presidency of the Erie, I'm sure. Could buy the B&M, that's a safe investment. And then the NYNH, he also could buy 1 share there. But other than that, he's out of opportunities to increase his shares. He buys the B&M. Arison also buying the B&M. Ken Butcher couldn't have bought those shares anyway, so he doesn't care. Maybe looking at the CPR from Ken Butcher. And he actually will buy 1 share in the Erie. Triple J, he buys the CPR. He wants just paying shares to help finance his last permanent train. So I think in retrospect, looking at Ken's decision there, he probably should have denied that share to Triple J. He's already at risk of a dump with 2 shares. Might as well make it 3 and then not allow Triple J to buy other people's shares that are going to pay out. Romaine is buying the Erie. May see this presidency split up and everybody just buy 1 share of it, so Triple J isn't able to exceed his cert limit by so much. Arison, yes. So everybody's just going to buy 1 share there, it looks like. Ken Butcher, he is passing out of safe investment opportunities, and Triple J is the only one left with the opportunity to really buy shares safely. This is the, I guess, benefit of having 4 presidencies is that really nobody can feel safe investing in your companies. He buys a non-paying share of the NYNH, but we'll see how long it's non-paying for. May not be very long for him to afford another permanent train. Romaine buys the NYNH, which potentially opens up Arison to dump again. You need to be very careful there, Arison. You've already gotten taken advantage of once. And Arison is going to risk it. Looks like everybody else is passing, and we do immediately see the dump. Wow. So Triple J has 3 companies now and has 3 permanent trains. He's gone from, I believe, 3 presidencies with no permanent trains to 3 presidencies with 3 permanent trains, and he has great routes. This should not have been allowed to happen. The C&O dump is a little bit hard to see coming. Most players are not going to be anticipating a dump during the operating round, but this NYNH dump is pretty hard to excuse. And to be honest, the C&O dump, even though it's hard to see that happening in the operating round, it's not like Triple J didn't have priority going into the stock round. So even if he didn't dump it in the operating round, you're still opening yourself up in the next stock round for a dump. Very unsafe investments. It does hurt Triple J's shares a little bit to sell out, but he probably doesn't care. He wants to buy paying shares in the Erie now that he can shuffle trains into that company. So he ends up with 6 shares there, and everybody else looks like they're passing. Arison, if you're going to be running the NYNH, I think you might as well invest in it. Just sitting on 2 shares of it for a company that you know is going to be running a train doesn't seem wise. Ken Butcher sells an NYC, and I think he's just worried that Arison's going to be in a position to dump the NYC on him. The Romaine player is safe from the dump because he operates ahead of Arison, and this share in the market's going to protect him. So that's unfortunate for Ken, but that's good looking ahead to your potential exposure. So I think that was necessary. Triple J buys the share that was sold, and now Romaine is in danger. So he may also be in a situation where he has to sell a share. Romaine going to be content to leave himself with that exposure, and looks like everyone is passing except for Triple J, who secures the final Erie share. So he's back up to 26 shares, quite far ahead of Arison and Ken, who are probably out of contention at this point, Arison in particular. Ken is still potentially in the lead, or in the contention for the lead, but with just a single presidency and very little map control, just the 6 train, don't imagine we'll be seeing him win this game. So I think Romaine is in the lead here, but Triple J has demonstrated that he is not going to go down without a fight. We will see if he's able to come back up from a $1,800 deficit. Arison passing, looks like everybody passes. We're in operating round 8. Not uncommon for the game to end in operating round 8. So we should look at the market here. With $8,000 in the market and a company on the hook for a permanent train, I think we can feel safe in the fact that the game will be extended and will not be ending here, which is bad news for Romaine, right? He's ahead. He wants the game to end, and he'll just win the game. But Triple J is going to have, looks like 6 operating rounds to try and catch up. B&O laying track that is unlikely to be of significance, runs for 280 and pays it out. CPR, his other company, does link up with Barry and has a little bit of a better run as a result, running for 150. But again, would have liked to see him just head towards Hamilton and Toronto here and pressure for a token here. you have multiple D trains coming out, all of them with access to these 00 tiles. It's important to not allow them to run for a lot of money. NYC D train here and running for just 210. So very underwhelming run for him, and he pays it out. B&M, a lot of money in this company. Really not a lot of opportunities to take advantage of it. Runs for 270, pretty good run actually for a 6 train, and pays that out. NY&H, is he just going to immediately buy the D, or is he going to try and shuffle to buy some time? Looks like he's selling shares, so he may just be kind of frustrated and willing to sell shares and just consign himself to last place. He is selling a bunch of shares and does afford the D. PRR has 2 trains, will not have these 2 trains for long, of course. But for now, operating order has worked out such that Triple J is not going to lose a run on either of these trains, which is very nice for him. Upgrading to get into Chicago, there is no valid upgrade that will get him there, so he's going to have to lay into Toledo and then Chicago. But with a D train, that's not the end of the world, and he has the money for the upgrades, so he's probably happy to do it. He lays the token in Philadelphia that we were worried about several operating rounds ago. Bad news for the B&O, and especially because the B&O is trying to win this game, this is going to hurt his revenue pretty substantially. Again, can't criticize the B&O player that much. He had to make the decision between the token and the train, and he took the token, or he took the train, but that is coming back to bite him now. So the PRR is running for 540, and he's actually withholding. That is surprising. So even with a payout here, no, he would leave the brown zone. So may just see one withhold to make sure he stays brown and then pay out for the rest of the game. He has a massive amount of money in this company. He's almost to buying another D train and just running 2 trains in the PRR for the rest of the game. He may want to consider that just because he has to withhold anyways, so might as well put that cash to use. CNO, getting the upgrade, but actually not making any progress towards Toledo, so not entirely sure about that track. Runs for 260, pays it out. Erie is on the hook for a train, but can buy it out of his friend the PRR, no trouble. He buys the 6, and we are into operating around 8.2. So CPR is potentially threatening the 00 like we talked about earlier, and is going to get there in time potentially to lay a token there. Running for 150 still and pays it out. B&O has been tokened out of Philadelphia, bad news for him, and is running for just 220, $60 loss. NYC running his D train, does upgrade in Hamilton and Toronto, does not have the cash for a token, and really is not that close to getting it. So this run is going to be short-lived, I think. Runs for 250, pays it out. B&M. He creates the link through Rochester and into the 00s, which hurts the D trains and potentially helps the CPR player if he's able to take advantage of this track and potentially get down into Detroit. He'll have much better revenue. Running for 280, pays it out. NY&H, D train, and not laying any track. This is the first run of this new D train. Does have a really nice revenue, 490, but unfortunately for Arison, he didn't decide to invest in this company at all in the last stock round, so he only gets 20% of this revenue. CNO running a 5 train, 270. PRR, does he withhold again and try and buy another D train? Looks like he's just going to use the cash for track, and running for 540. So some pretty strong D runs here. We'll look at the stock spreadsheet in just a second and see if that's going to be enough to win the game. Running for 280 and pays it out. Looking at the spreadsheet, the revenue from Triple J is about $400 ahead of Romaine, and the other two players are trailing. Romaine is $1,500 ahead of Triple J, and there's probably 4 more operating rounds left. So if he's $400 ahead in revenue and only $1,500 behind, Triple J is actually on track. He's on pace to win this game. Romaine trying to improve his run on CPR a little bit and is running for 150 for now. B&O, not really any track left for him, just running for 220. NYC, not a whole lot of track for him either, 320. B&M, not entirely sure where he's hoping to head with this track here. Running a 6 train without having to hit any of these dits. So that's probably an optimal run. 280 pays that out. NYNH, D train, heading up north. This upgrade is available, it looks like. The straight upgrade here. So the NYNH could potentially run this track from the CPR, but this is not going to improve his run. Adding $110 is not going to be better than $130 here. So unclear to me why he's heading up this way. I think that players in the late game tend to lay track just to do things, but track has consequences, and if it's not helping you, it might help another player. So I don't know where he's hoping to head here. Runs for 490, and he pays that out. C&O, just a 5 train, and he's heading down south. Surprised we're not seeing the Toledo upgrade here. We've seen people be blocked in green before, and it looks like that's actually the case again. So that's really bad news for Triple J. I'm sure he wanted to get a run into Chicago through Toledo for his D trains, but that's actually not going to be available to him. And there's no more brown upgrades, so that's going to be the case for the rest of the game. Runs for 270, PRR. He actually takes this upgrade and makes it unavailable, which is a little bit surprising. I suppose that he's worried about the CPR player running down from Ottawa into New York and increasing his revenue on the CPR, which is a reasonable concern to have. It is close between those two players. So I think that's why he's decided to block this. He realizes that the increased revenue from his D trains is not going to be as high compared to the increased revenue from the CPR. So he's blocking that. Runs for 540 and pays it out. Erie, last run of this operating set, running for 280. So we're into stock round 9. There is only $2,000 left in the bank. We will see the bank break in the next operating set, and Romaine has priority. So he has 1 share he can buy, and he is in the lead by about $1,100. Arison is eliminated. He has too few shares and too little net worth to be involved in this game. Ken Butcher is not that far behind, but unfortunately his share deficit is going to be such that he cannot win this game. And then Triple J is, I think we've determined, on track to win this game, even though he's $1,100 behind. The saving grace for Romaine is that the NYNH has 5 shares available, so Romaine should be able to pick up 2 of those shares to Triple J just picking up 1. And this is high revenue, so this may shake things up enough to give Romaine the win. He, having said that, goes back and buys the NYC. The NYC has much less revenue, but the stock appreciation should be better there. So he may have done the math and realized that the $15 bumps and the $30 bump he gets from floating up is actually going to outweigh the higher revenue of the NYNH. And if he does not buy the NYNH, it's not like he's giving 2 shares to the Triple J. Triple J is still going to just get 1. So reasonable. As long as you do the math and confirm that this is the better share. Arison, he's buying the NYNH. Ken Butcher, buying the NYNH. Triple J, NYNH, and Romaine should buy an NYH here. And is passing. So is it true that his portfolio is optimal? Is there really not a share that he should sell for this revenue? So he doesn't want to sell the NYC. He just bought that, obviously. But surely his CPR would be worth selling a single share of um, to buy an NYNH. You are hurting your net worth in terms of your shares falling down, but it's probably going to float back up. You're losing a $20 float by selling your share. Yeah, I don't know. This is hard to analyze as a commentator in real time. You'd have to sit down and do the math. But I suspect that there's a better share here. I hope that Romain sat down and did the math and really determined that the B&O, the B&M, or the CPR were better than holding on to the NYNH here. Even as B&O, similar thing. You have to, the B&O is ledged. So that one is, I think, a no-brainer. You have to sell the B&O for the NYNH here. The stock appreciation is 5 for the NYNH, so the revenue is 540, so to speak, and 220 plus 15 is definitely less. So it would be strictly better for him to sell a B&O and buy an NYNH here. Okay. Ken Butcher has taken that gift and bought the NYNH. At least, like I said, Triple J didn't get the second share there. I think that would be really bad for Romain. Triple J, he buys the B&M. Romain continuing to pass. Now it's more reasonable. He really doesn't have investment opportunities, but I think he missed an opportunity there in terms of optimizing his portfolio. Arison buys the B&O. That company will be floating up. Ken Butcher buys the last CPR, and there's officially no more shares left. So Triple J will be leaving priority, but that's irrelevant at this point. In terms of stock or track, I don't know that there's necessarily a whole lot of interesting track decisions to be made here. We may be able to move through this operating round pretty quickly. B&O running for 220, probably his run for the rest of the game. NYC, no track for him, running for 320. CPR does have cash and actually has $160, so could lay both of these tracks, but why? He's running a 5 train and he's opening up D runs for his competitor. So may just want to token somewhere and just cut runs. You're not running a D train, so you're not worried about the runs. And in terms of investments, you're really not even that invested in the D runs. You got a shares in the NYC. But other than that, you really don't have any D shares. So just token somewhere that the NYC has a share, a token already on Albany, for instance, and just hope that that cuts somebody's run and hurts their revenue more than it hurts you. CPR instead is going to be laying towards Detroit. So I think this is risky. Potentially, you're opening up the north of the map for a monster D run for the PRR, for instance. Yeah, PRR's got the cash to upgrade there. This is risky. I don't know what he's hoping to achieve with that track lay. Runs for 150, pays it out. B&M, no track left for him, just paying out. NYNH, paying out for 490. C&O, not clear where he's heading there. PRR takes advantage of the track opportunity, and I'm sure is going to make a beeline for the straight upgrade into the north. And actually with the Erie, I think he cannot quite lay that with the Erie. Runs for 540, Erie, just throwing away track here. Runs for 280 and pays out. So let's just look at the spreadsheet here and get an update, see if that stock round changed things at all. Romain did have more stock bumps in the stock round, so got a little bit of a leg up on Triple J there. Triple J is now running for, let's call it 430 more than Romain, and is $800 behind, give or take, almost exactly $800 behind. So he's still on track narrowly, it looks like, to beat Romain in the next 2 operating rounds. CPR actually completes the link up here. I think, well, and he's $5 short of laying a token here. If you could token here, fine. But the fact that you're just creating all this new track for the PRR to run seems like a huge mistake. running for 180. B&O, no track for him, just pays it out. NYC, still no track there. B&M. I think the only thing that matters here is what the PRR run is. So let's zip through this. NYNH, 490, the bank breaks. Triple J, he's upgrading down here, so this is a death sentence because now he can upgrade this with the PRR and he can just run around the entire map with the PRR. He's going to double tap New York, despite being tokened out at Scranton, all those operating rounds again. And his run increased from 540 to 650. So Romaine gave him, $11 per run that he didn't need to with these upgrades. That was preventable with a token. And Romaine has no shares in this PRR, none at all. So that's devastating. Pays out 650. Erie with the 6 train. It's going to run for 280 and pays it out. We're into the last operating round. And Triple J is still running ahead of Romaine and actually increased his margin. So looks like he's going to be taking the win here. I don't think there's anything that Romaine can do here. He doesn't have the money for the tokens that he needs. So we'll skip to the end. And Triple J takes it by a margin of $140 something. You got to look at these revenues on the PRR and just imagine, if he had run for 540 in these last 2 operating rounds, how close that would be. And, perhaps Romaine adjusts his portfolio and doesn't give Triple J those runs, and Romaine takes this game. So some misplay at the very end for Romaine, who otherwise I think would have narrowly won this game. I think the standout player in this game is definitely Triple J. I mean, he came back from the brink of bankruptcy with some very flashy plays, dumping, I believe, 2 companies on Arison, able to steal one of those companies back. Just really very clever play. It is, play that is predicated on errors from other players, but still, to recognize those opportunities and make it work and bring out the victory is very well done. So congratulations to him. Well played to the other players, and hopefully we'll get to see who ends up winning this tournament and whether or not these players advance, that kind of thing. Very interesting to watch tournament play again and just see higher level play. Thanks for watching, and Track Talk will be back in the future with additional commentary.